It's the Awesemo NFL DFS Strategy Show, Week 11 final look. Show sponsored by Yahoo. Once again, Greg Ehrenberg here, joined by Geoff Ulrich. Geoff, this is the week of Taysom Hill.
Yeah, man. I mean, things change a lot in a short span. I mean, I think a couple days ago, I made a lineup I was really happy with, had DeAndre Swift in it. I had Michael Thomas in it, was feeling good. And, we're back to step one here. We're starting from scratch. A lot of news dropped yesterday. And, it is going to be the week of Taysom Hill. Although, I don't know. I mean, how chalky is this guy going to be? It's something we're definitely going to have to talk about and get around as we get to the QBs.
Yeah, so, I mean, we'll also have to talk about him on FanDuel, where he is tight end eligible. We don't have to spend that much time on it.
Actually, we don't have to, because you should just play him.
Yeah, because here's the deal. Like, I'm sure there are people who are doing shows where they're just spending like 20 minutes talking about Taysom Hill at tight end and how it impacts the slate. You just play him. It doesn't matter. There's not that much to think about.
There's probably going to be like 5% of people who don't play him. They're paying the rake this week. Like, legitimately, that's what's happening. So just play him and move on to your other positions.
Yeah, where I think it's a lot more interesting to talk about is him on DraftKings and how viable he is there, and how we're going to stack him. I mean, before we get in that, though, I do have to mention that the show is sponsored by Yahoo. And guys, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast network, and give us a thumbs up on the video. Give us a nice little like. Make us feel good about ourselves heading into the holidays, though. I don't know if Geoff celebrates American Thanksgiving. They had Canadian Thanksgiving like months ago with your dearth of holidays. There's a Canadian holiday every 3 days or something like that.
It's true. I like American Thanksgiving, though, because it means I get a break, because everyone takes a break there. And all my work is stems from the States. So it's like double Thanksgiving for me, Greg. It's great. It's a good time to be
fair enough. One thing that I really makes this Taysom Hill play interesting to me is I was kind of like, I don't know what to do with him on DraftKings. Like I said, FanDuel tight end, easy, play him. But then I looked at our projections for this week, and we have Taysom Hill as one of the highest projected quarterbacks on the slate right now. I don't know what the Saints offense is going to look like with Taysom Hill. I'm going to have some exposure to him. I don't know if I want to stack him with anybody. I feel like I have to play him naked. I don't know if he could throw the ball at all, but maybe he runs the ball. Maybe he runs the ball 25 times as the quarterback, and they just run a bunch of Wildcat. It's going to be weird. I don't know what it's going to look like. I did bet a bunch of unders on Saints wide receivers. So how are you handling Taysom Hill on DraftKings? How much exposure do you want to get to him?
Yeah, I mean, and I mentioned Michael Thomas off the top because that's going to be the toughest decision for me. I'm going to have Taysom Hill exposure. I think this is a gift at 4,800. I remember, like, were you around on the Johnny Manziel week, Greg? Like when everyone played Johnny Manziel, like 5K.
Probably. I don't remember the days of Johnny Manziel.
It was similar to this. It's like, oh my God, Johnny Manziel is like, his floor is like 50 yards rushing, and like he's going to get at least 10 points. And he got like -5 points or something for like legitimately. I think he ended up in minus. Anyways, it was a huge bust week. I always feel good about that because I like Johnny Manziel to me was just an easy fade. But Taysom Hill is legitimately a running back playing quarterback. Like, okay, he's not Lamar Jackson, but like he is a different style of runner, and that's why the Saints use him in those formations as a fullback and stuff like that. So I'm pretty confident that like you're going to get a lot of rushing yards out of Taysom Hill this week. And I know Twitter likes to, he's not that good, and he's got an arm. Like he can chuck the ball down the field a little bit. I'm not expecting a 300-yard game or something, or like 4 touchdowns, but like if he ended up with like a slightly lesser like Lamar Jackson kind of game that we're used to, like 200 yards, a touchdown and a rushing touchdown, and maybe 80 yards rushing, that's pretty much what I'm expecting here. And because again, it's Atlanta, right? So I'm pretty high on the spot. I generally, like I said, I like to fade guys when they're getting a little bit too chalky, but at 4,800, just how I feel about Taysom Hill, this is, I really hope he doesn't his ownership gets out of control. I'm still going to play him, but I really hope people take the stance of, wow, I just don't like this guy, and his ownership stays low, because I think this is too good to pass up.
So I'll say this about him, at least for right now, we don't have him projected for very much ownership, but we have him with a very high individual projection. To what you said about him having a good arm. Yeah, I guess he does, but he's thrown 18 total career pass attempts in the NFL.
And I'm not trying to say like we can make a judgment on him based on that. I'm just saying he's probably not as bad a passer as people like to make out he is. That was my point. You're right.
So here's the actual, like the real biggest concern I would say is, this goes even beyond his ability to play the quarterback position. if they get down by 2 touchdowns, do they just bring Jameis Winston in? If they fall behind in this game and they go like, hey, Taysom Hill can't really throw the ball, we need to throw the ball to catch up. What are the chances that Jameis Winston actually comes in? And by no means would I actually be rostering Jameis Winston this weekend as a quarterback who isn't starting, but more so this is something that's a concern for me that's going to make it so Taysom Hill isn't a guy who I have like 15 or 20% exposure to. So how realistic do you think it is that Winston comes in at some point?
I don't think it's that realistic, to be honest. I think with how the Saints run their offense, I think Hill is going to be out there. They're still going to run the ball a little bit if they're down. Again, and look, a lot of the Saints offense anyways is predicated on short passes, right? So I think, look, if Taysom Hill goes out there and he can't complete like a 2-yard pass or something, and he just looks terrible, and I'm completely dead wrong about him, like to the point where I think he can't even complete a forward pass, yeah, maybe you'll see Winston. And look, I think there is a chance that scenario breaks out. Like you've got to factor that in, that there's probably a little bit more bust potential here, but I think realistically the Saints are all in on this. I think Sean Payton has been all in on this spot for a couple of years now, and he's just been waiting for it to happen because he knows it was either, Breeze was going to retire or Breeze is going to get injured at some point. I also think that, people are a little too high on Jameis Winston. Like, I think Sean Payton knows who Jameis Winston is. I don't think Jameis Winston gives your team a good shot to win games. I know he's a great fantasy quarterback. We talked about this last week, but I think Sean Payton realizes Taysom Hill gives your team a better chance to win. And I think that goes for all situations. I think down, he can be, he can break some runs off too. So I don't think that's very likely to happen, but it is a scenario. Like we said, I mean, it's a really small sample size of passing we have from Taysom Hill. He could be even worse than like I have projected for. So.
Yeah, I just think it's really, I think the upside is apparent. I also think it's really hard to have a concrete opinion on him. I know for sure I don't like it when Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara come off the field for Taysom Hill when the Saints are in the red zone. But I think it's really crazy to see somebody who has 18 career pass attempts and be able to say definitively that he's a great or terrible or somewhere in the middle quarterback. There's just not enough information to know. He didn't throw the ball particularly well when he was in college. That is something to take note of. I do think it's a little weird last week that if Taysom Hill is the guy who Sean Payton definitely thinks is the best quarterback on the team, why do you bring in Jameis Winston after Drew Brees got hurt? That's a little weird to me also. So I'm going to get some exposure to Taysom Hill in GPPs. I'm probably going to align myself with the field with him just because I don't know what to expect. So I'm just going to say whatever the field's going to do, that's probably about what I'm going to do with Taysom Hill also.
Okay.
All right. The actual chalk at the position, as of now anyway, who knows? Maybe we'll be Taysom Hill chalk by the time we get to lock tomorrow. But right now, the chalk at the position is Justin Herbert going up against the Jets. And pretty much any quarterbacks in a spot to really succeed against the Jets. The only question mark you have here is, are they going to actually have to throw the ball in the fourth quarter or even in the third quarter if they get up by a ton?
It's definitely a concern here. Obviously especially with Herbert being the most chalky play. So, I mean, people watch this show like every week probably know I'm a pretty big Justin Herbert fan right now. But, we did have this concern with KC and Mahomes ended up dropping 5 touchdowns on them. So you can always make this concern when you have a heavy favorite, but I think there's a couple things that would, make me think Herbert's probably going to be okay this week. One, the Chargers suck at defending leads. Like they're terrible. They're going to let the Jets in this game, I think, in my opinion. There's a good scenario that, the Chargers defense just folds a couple times and keeps the Jets close enough that Herbert probably is throwing enough. And then the other factor is, we might just need 3/4 of Justin Herbert. I mean, he's good enough to just launch like 3 long touchdowns and get 300 yards and like 3 touchdowns on like 26 attempts. So you are talking about that kind of efficient of a player. I do think that there's a good argument though for if you're going to fade it, go with Kalen Ballage this week as a good, leverage play off the Chargers passing. That's something I'll definitely be doing in lineups because Ballage is getting over 70% of the carries. We'll talk to him in a bit about him more, obviously, but this just pertains to if you're not using Justin Herbert, if you're fading him, I think Ballage is a great way to get exposure to that game and get leverage on the passing attack.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially if you lay out the game script that I just said, where it's what happens if the Chargers get up by, 20 points or something like that. They're playing the Jets. Not ridiculous. As bad as the Chargers have been, as bad as you said, if they've been holding leads, the Jets can get blown out by anybody. So it was something I hadn't considered, but I do agree with you a little bit is if we're going to see Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen gets to be super chalky, I think it does make sense that the leverage play there would be Balaj, just because the game script would be favorable for him in the spot where we would most likely see them fail. So I do like that point of view. I think that is pretty sharp. One thing I'm pretty surprised by here, looking at the ownership, Cam Newton coming in pretty chalky. Again, well, I mean, relatively, pretty much all the quarterbacks are projected for like 6 to 12% ownership this week. But Cam Newton as a popular quarterback going up against the Houston Texans, I get that they have a bad defense, and I certainly like Jacoby Myers a lot as a wide receiver option. So there is somebody you could stack Newton with. But are you surprised to see how much ownership Newton is getting, given how much he's struggled over the last few weeks?
Yeah, it was actually probably the most surprising thing when I looked at QB ownership this week. Does look like Lamar's getting back up there, but Lamar's matchup is a lot better too. And quite frankly, Lamar's a better player, right? Even though the Ravens have sucked. So you can kind of understand that. I was surprised, and I'm surprised that like Myers is getting up there too. I know he's 4,900, but like people are in on this. It's, it definitely feels like a rug pull spot. Like this is a team that wants to run the ball a ton, and they're going up against Houston, who is the worst run defense in the league. Cam might just not have to do anything in this game. Myers might not have to do anything in this game. It's a pretty scary spot to be eating chalk here with Cam Newton and Jacoby Myers this week, in my opinion, because I think that there is a very, very good chance of this game playing out exactly how I said. Damian Harris, Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead taking like 40 touches, and that's it. And Cam throws the ball like 14 times. I could absolutely see this game playing out like that.
So with that in mind, then, what do you think is going to happen with the Texans offense? Because right now, behind Justin Herbert, the second highest projected on quarterback is Deshaun Watson. So if it's a game where you think there's a chance where the Patriots just run the ball a ton, and by the way, not to belabor the point too much because I already asked you the question, but looking at some of these quarterbacks, this is a weird slate for stacks because we've got a ton of rushing quarterbacks. So we don't know how often they're going to be throwing the ball. Cam Newton is one of the guys that goes in that mix, and Taysom Hill we talked about. But anyway, with all that aside, Deshaun Watson is projecting to be pretty highly owned this week. If you think this is going to be a spot where the Patriots look to run the ball a ton, what do you make of Deshaun Watson then?
Yeah, I think it's got to scare you a little bit on Watson too. Obviously there's scenarios where he'll just be throwing late in the game and he'll be okay. But if it's a slower paced game and the Patriots are able to hit up a ton of clock, man, like there just might not be that much field for Deshaun Watson in this game. Again, I mean, as you guys can probably tell, I'm not super bullish on this one. It could break out it could break out different ways too, where maybe the Patriots just score a little bit faster. Maybe Damian Harris breaks an 80-yard run and then it's just crazy time for Deshaun Watson. Like that's on the table too. I think I have more confidence in Deshaun Watson in the spot than I do for Cam Newton, because I think there's that insane garbage time aspect, sort of insane comeback mode aspect that you'll get with Deshaun Watson. As opposed to Cam. So if you're asking me which one of these QBs, like for stacking and for GPPs or whatever, it's definitely going to be the Deshaun Watson side. But again, I think there's a little bit more risk here than the field seems to be acknowledging. It's just in my opinion. Again, I don't hate either of these plays, but definitely like Watson more, and definitely I think a little bit more concerned about it than maybe the field this week.
So one thing that's also interesting about this spot, the total is 49. If you go to Odd Shopper on Awesemo, you could compare, all the best odds that are everywhere, and you look at the totals. Shockingly low totals across the league this weekend. This game, 49 points total. There's only one game on the entire slate with a total over 50 points, and that is Green Bay at Indianapolis, 4:00 game this week. It is a tough matchup for Green Bay, but considering the total of that spot, how much do you think that Aaron Rodgers is a viable, just low-owned quarterback? He's projecting to be one of the least-owned quarterbacks on the slate. Still pretty expensive at $7,000. It is a tough matchup on paper against the Colts, but like I said, just looking at those totals, this game is a total over 50. Every other game we're looking at, totals in the mid-40s. So with that in mind, Aaron Rodgers, decent contrarian play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of those QBs. You just when you get him in low-owned spots like this against perceived tough defenses, you don't really worry about. I know one of the best weeks I ever had in DFS was rostering Rodgers against just a perceived really tough defense, kind of like Indy is right now, right? So, and he came in at like 2% owned. I think he threw like just 6 touchdowns. This was like 5 or 6 years ago, but you get my point. It's the same kind of spot. It's Aaron Rodgers, who again, I mean, he's got Davante Adams now. Actually, is Alan Lazard back? That is one thing I didn't check, but we'll get to that when we get to wide receivers. But you get my point. I mean, he's still got an elite wide receiver to throw to. Marcus Valdez-Scantling is coming on. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. I think I'd rather take a shot and be overweight on Rodgers than be overweight on one of Deshaun and Cam Newton. Is basically the long and the short of it. I like Rodgers in this spots a lot. It's always somewhere where I want to target him.
No, I think that's totally reasonable. Of the low-owned quarterbacks this week, he is the one that I like the most, that I think has the most upside. I certainly prefer him to Phillip Rivers in the same game, who's also coming in at sub 3% ownership. The other guys are just hard for me to get excited about. The Andy Daltons, the Carson Wentzes of the world. It's hard for me to really get behind those guys.
You're right. Like there's basically two games. I mean, Atlanta and Indy with like 50-point totals. I don't even know if Atlanta is over there anymore because of the Taysom Hill news. So there's not many games to get excited about, and there's not many QBs, quite frankly. Like Alex Smith is a guy that's getting a little bit of heat this week, but I'm not still that excited about rostering Alex Smith. I mean, we talked about him last week. Yeah. He still looks a little dainty out there, and it's just like scary. So no, I really like Rodgers in this spot with other people sort of trying to maybe make other guys something they aren't. The only other high kind of price QB, and he is getting a little bit of love now, is Ben. Who's coming off a great game, and we could see a similar type of game, maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns against another weak defense. So that's another spot. You really have to go all in there and go with like a double stack with Ben and just pray that works out.
So talking about some of those ownership projections, actually the free content of the day at awesemo.com. So if you want to see some of the ownership projections, which I think is the most useful tool for NFL DFS, really for most DFS, if you're playing GPPs, that's free on awesemo.com. So that's a really good way to just look at some of those ownerships.
This week, it's a really good week maybe to try it out because, again, this Taysom Hill news could change ownership like going into Sunday. So you might look on it today, but if you have access to it, like you'll get the updates that Alex does and puts out and stuff like that going into the Sunday lock. Because Taysom Hill right now, like Greg and I said, under 10%, but by lock, it could be up to 15 or something. I don't know how this is actually going to play out. We're kind of in the dark, just like you guys. I'm not actually sure how people are going to react to this by tomorrow morning. So.
Yeah, I tend to think, we have them at about 7.5% right now, and that's on DraftKings. FanDuel, it's going to be 150%, but on DraftKings, we have them at 7.5%. I assume it's going to creep around 10-ish. I think there's a lot of people like me who are just unsure what to make of Taysom Hill. There's some people that have convictions, but there's people who have convictions about everything. I think the majority of people are going to look at Taysom Hill and not really know what to do and just be like, I'll put him in some lineups, but not all my lineups. And that's why I think he probably settles somewhere around 10% ownership. Talking about ownership, though, the chalkiest player on the entire slate as we move over to the running back position, Dalvin Cook, who's just been absolutely crushing lately. Very favorable matchup against the Cowboys, who, number one, not only can they not stop the run at all, basically every running back sets up is a terrific game script against the Cowboys because every team's up by 1 million points on them in the second half and team just run the ball. So Dalvin Cook coming in at over 30% ownership on a slate that doesn't really have that much chalk. Cook is the very much standout chalk play. I think you have to play him in cash. GPPs, it gets a little interesting. How much are you willing to roster him in tournament lineups? So,
like I said, I was really high on DeAndre Swift before the news broke that he wasn't going to play. And I think that if Swift was around, Dalvin Cook could have made for a bit more interesting pivot because I really felt like Swift was underpriced there, and you could have taken advantage by going overweight him and maybe going a bit more balanced approach. Now I'm kind of back on. I think you just need to put Dalvin Cook in all your lineups. I've been, again, I think part of the thing here is he's chalky for a couple of reasons. He's still underpriced. He's a player averaging over 30 touches his last 4 games. He's averaging over 30 touches. Like, that is absolutely insane in today's NFL. And now he's going up against the Cowboys, who obviously we all know, they allow a ton of rushes against too. That's one thing the Cowboys have done because they're so bad on offense. So, teams are averaging like top 10 in terms of rush attempts against on the Cowboys. Like, it's just a good spot. And the thing is, for Dalvin Cook, he doesn't even need it to be a good spot because right now they're just keeping him on the field all the time. So I think he's underpriced. I think that, again, with the loss of Swift and they're just, you got Chubb and Hunt, but who do you play there? I kind of like the spot. Henry going up against Baltimore. I mean, okay, that could work out, but like, again, you're really going to go like what, 30, 50% on Derrick Henry in that spot? Probably not. I think you just go overweight Cook and you know, you just you just go over the field. I think that's the smart player.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially when, to your point, you consider some of the other running backs priced around him. It's like, if you're not paying up for Dalvin Cook, who are you paying up for at running back,
Yeah.
right? Because we've
Who are
got
you paying
Alvin
up for in
Kamara.
general, right?
Yeah,
Like,
we don't know. Yeah, it's Cook and Davante Adams, and that's the reason why they're popular. It's hard to find other options you could really be confident in. I mean, Alvin Kamara 9,200. It's a good matchup against the Falcons, but who knows what to expect from his production with Taysom Hill at quarterback. And then we've got, like you said, Derrick Henry going up against the Ravens. Fine, but he didn't get a lot of passing game work, and that's a really tough matchup. Then we've got Aaron Jones, who split snaps last week basically with Jamal Williams. He ended up being a terrible chalk play. He ended up doing all right, but still, he was not worth his ownership at all. Then you got Nick Chubb, who's splitting touches with Hunt right now. So you just compare Cook to the other high-end running back options, and he's just by far the superior option. I mean, if you look at the projections we have, he's the only running back on the slate we have projected for over 20 fantasy points. He's projected for nearly 30. So there's just nobody who's nearly in the same stratosphere as him in terms of projection. And for that reason, I think he's well worth what the ownership is, the price tag. And I'm also probably going to be overweight to Dalvin Cook in a big way on tomorrow's slate. Moving down into the mid-range, we've got Mike Davis, the chalk of last week's slate, who I'm sure everybody's really frustrated with, understandably so. But it's not like he totally sucked. I mean, he kind of did, except, I mean, like I had Mike Davis in 100% of my lineups on DraftKings. I had him in more than half my lineups on FanDuel, and I doubled up my money last week. I did fairly well. He was a good enough value to be decent. And the other thing to consider too is he didn't play much in the second half because he had a thumb injury. And that's really what my biggest concern is with him this week. It's not really what happened last week. It's what's the health of his thumb. Because if you look at the production that we typically get from Mike Davis, so much of it is predicated on his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. And last week, he got 5 targets, caught 4 of them, which is fine. But I do worry a little bit is how much is the thumb injury going to hinder his pass catching ability? But still, Mike Davis, not nearly as chalk as he was last week. Favorable matchup against the Lions. How willing are you to go back to the well with Mike Davis after people are probably outraged and tired of hearing his name after last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, it's not necessarily the price or even just like the player or anything. The matchup is great. I think the thing that concerns me more is again, the injury issue, like you brought up, and then the quarterback play as well. If PJ Walker or Will Greer, I don't know, I actually don't know who's going to start yet if they've named a starter.
I think Bridgewater I think Bridgewater's still questionable.
He's still questionable, yeah. So again, exactly, they haven't named a starter. I didn't think I'd miss anything, but whoever is in there, I mean, and Bridgewater being questionable or just being not 100% is almost as scary because then it'd be an in-game switch, which kind of is even worse. So. I just worry that they're going to have trouble moving the ball this week. I guess that's my biggest concern with the Panthers too. So, Mike Davis isn't like a game changer like Christian McCaffrey. You can necessarily just like hold up a crappy QB. So I think there's legitimate concerns here. I think the other thing is like he's 6,800. So I see some people mentioning like, Aaron Jones and Derrick Henry is low in plays. And I think at this price, I would rather do that, like, or even take a shot on Nick Chubb. I just feel like at this price, it's okay to get up there. I think Derrick Henry is going to be like someone you can sprinkle in. And so I'd almost rather take like the shares I would allocate to Mike Davis and maybe just spread them on a couple of these. Admittedly, they're more boom or bust plays probably than Mike Davis, but like I think their upside is actually better this week because again, with the quarterback issues, with Davis maybe not being 100% or just having that little, like percentage chance of injury heightened, then I think that's probably what I'm looking at. So I guess that's my way of saying I don't really love it, but I do recognize that like he still could end up being like the play this week at that price.
So here's somebody I'm kind of interested by, but I don't quite know what to make of him. That's Salvon Ahmed from the Dolphins. Right. And it's really just because of what his workload was last week. He's still cheap. Nobody's rostering him. But still, look at what he did last week. I mean, he got 1 target in the passing game, but 21 rush attempts for a guy who's 4,800, decent matchup against the Broncos, and nobody's rostering him. Given his workload last week, how repeatable do you think that is? Do you think we're going to see him be a workhorse again for the Dolphins, or is this going to be a thing where it's like a Seahawks backfield situation? It's like, nah, it's somebody else this week.
Yeah, the Broncos have been getting tuned on the ground too. So
Yeah.
I was really interested in this spot too when I saw that. Like Josh Jacobs and Devontae Booker ran for like 300 yards last week. That was 200, but so Matt Breida's back this week, and that is almost enough to just make me say I just can't do this because I have no idea what's going to happen there. You know, the Dolphins have been so coy about what they're doing at running back since the start, since giving Myles Gaskins the carry, giving Jordan Howard goal line work. Maybe Howard will be active this week too. That's another thing that could just throw a huge.
No, they cut him.
Oh, did they cut him? Okay, well never mind then. That's good. Again, there's so much going on this week, but that's good to know.
They put him on the practice squad.
That makes sense. They didn't start him last week, right? Yeah. When they could have. So that's good that Jordan Howard is at least out of there. But at the same time, Matt Breida is a guy that they're probably going to mix in. So I mean, if I'm going to roster one of these two, it's going to be Ahmed because I think that, you know, them giving him the workload last week, like I said, when they could have brought Howard in and stuff like that. And realistically, they haven't committed to Breida in any way, shape, or form when they could have as well. So I think Ahmed is the play here. It's still a pretty scary spot. But I agree. Like, this is an intriguing matchup, an intriguing situation. Miami are favorites. Denver is basically just headed down the toilet, so to speak. I'm not sure. Again, another situation I'm not sure on. Drew Lock's still questionable. Looks like he might play, but like if he doesn't, I mean, you know, Miami could just be running the ball all second half. So even if Lock does play, they could be running the ball all second half. Ahmed is in play, but he's definitely fairly risky. And I guess the other thing I'd say, like, there's some pretty good main like guys in the 5K range who we know are going to get main carries. That if I can get up there, I'd much rather get up there this week.
So here's my real favorite contrarian play of the week, though, and I don't get why this guy's been picking up more ownership on DraftKings. J.D. McKissic, who, as bad as he is running the football, captain checkdown Alex Smith does nothing but throw this guy short passes. Last 2 weeks, J.D. McKissic, in week 9 against the Giants, 14 targets. Then in week 10 against the Lions, 15 targets. Now look at the matchup this week. Pretty decent one against the Cincinnati Bengals. A guy who's only 5,200 on DraftKings, not quite as favorable on FanDuel because it's only the half point PPR bonus. And this is a guy who's going to get almost all of his fantasy points on 2-yard pass plays. But look at this kind of work in the passing game. And I don't understand why nobody wants to roster this guy against the Bengals. That's such a ridiculous amount of targets. And he's been so unsuccessful and they keep going to him. I don't see any reason it's going to stop. So can you talk me off J.D. McKissic or is there any reason to think they're not just going to keep throwing him the ball a million times?
I looked at that too. And I'm like, what, am I missing something? Like, does his points do his PPR points not count as much? Like, why isn't this guy the uber chalk? He's 29 targets over his last 2 weeks. He's 5,200, and people are still playing Duke Johnson, or projecting to play Duke Johnson over him. It's really weird. I agree. I think people just don't know really what to do in this spot. I also think that people are really high on Terry McLaurin this week and the passing game because since he's passing, defense is so bad and has been so bad, especially last week. So I think people are more just on that spot and they're like, well, I can't play more than 2 Redskins or I can't play more than 1 Redskin. Or, sorry, Washington football team guy.
What do you even call them? What are their players? They're just, I can't play one more of their teamers.
I usually just try and say Washington, the Washington players, and sound like a complete, doorknob. But anyways, yeah, I agree. Like, this price is ridiculous, right? The Washingtonians. Yeah, that's a good one. This price is ridiculous. Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the very least, like you're heading into a player with 5,200 with a floor of like 14 points or something, right? Realistically. So unless something happens, and the game flow just goes completely insane where maybe they're just giving Gibson like 20 touches. But even in that situation, McKissic is probably going to be involved. So yeah, I agree. Look, I'm not going to try and talk you off it. I will say this, like I said, I do like Bailage up there at 5,600. I think it's a great spot. He played over 70% of the snaps. I was one of those players in this range I was alluding to. Gio Bernard is also interesting on the other side of this game. Washington doesn't have a great run defense, and Bernard is really matchup proof. So, Gio could end up being the play here, but yeah, man, like I got nothing bad to say about this. Like I said, my reaction was the same as yours. I'm just not sure if I'm going to necessarily play him because I do want to play McLaurin as well. And I am one of those people who don't want to play 2 Washingtonians in the same lineup. So I'm like, I got McLaurin in there. I got to find some space for McKissic.
Yeah, I'm going to end up talking myself into making double stacks with Alex Smith, with Terry McLaurin, and JD McKissic. And it's not even so much that I think that the upside is massive for Alex Smith, but it's just hard to find quarterbacks to stack guys with this week. And I think that's where almost all of the target share on Washington is going to. It's going to JD McKissic. It's going to Terry McLaurin. And that's kind of it. Each of them are getting targeted like 30 times or something like that per game. It's ridiculous. So we know where all that production is coming from. So if Alex Smith does have a ceiling game where he plays really well, we know who all the guys are that are getting targets. It's going to mean that McKissic and McLaurin have big games. So as we talk about this more, I think I'm talking myself more and more into stacking Washington a little bit. Any other low-owned running backs you want to talk about? There's really just Dalvin Cook, chalk, and then nobody else is over 20%. So it's not like we've seen most weeks.
No, absolutely. It is kind of interesting. It feels like almost anyone who's not Dalvin Cook is going to be like at pretty good ownership, which is interesting. And it'll make for some, even with a really chalky high owned player, like it's going to be an interesting how you make combos. So I guess, like Adrian Peterson or Kerryon Johnson is kind of in play. I'm always going to kind of go to Kerryon Johnson in that spot because I think he's more likely to get involved as a receiver. And I think he's got a little bit more big playability at this point in his career. But I think both those guys are in play. There's a reason we all wanted to play DeAndre Swift before. Carolina's a horrible run defense. And look, Kerryon Johnson was a guy people liked and trusted. Like Kerryon Johnson was very high up in a lot of people's minds a couple of years ago. So I could see him being a play. I'll throw out LaMichael Pirine, who apparently Adam Gase is going to give a lot of carries to here. I don't really believe it, but at 4,400, he's a little bit interesting. We talked about Ahmed. It's probably pretty close between him and Ahmed, but with Miami just being a better team and just being more trustworthy, and with the news that we don't have to worry about like a third running back with Howard, I think Ahmed probably a little bit higher upside.
So let's transition over to the wide receivers. But first, today's show is sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, the most trusted name in fantasy sports. Yahoo DFS now includes CSV upload and CSV edit features for those looking to play multiple lineups, make better choices, choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. And also, do us a favor. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because I was told before the show that I am not invited to my family's Thanksgiving dinner if I do not get a certain number of likes on this video. I'm not going to give out what the number is because I want it to be something realistic, and I may or may not have made that up. But still, like the video, or else I don't get to eat turkey this year. So that would be a great help. Wide receivers, Davante Adams coming in pretty popular. I get it. He's been ridiculous in terms of fantasy production lately. And it's also just the red zone work he gets. I mean, touchdowns over the last 4 games, 1-1, 3-2. The Packers get the ball to the 1 yard line and they're not running the ball up the middle with Aaron Jones. They're running a play action. They're running some kind of action to get the ball to Davante Adams along the sideline. So I think that Adams definitely makes sense to guy to pay up for this slate. Also, like we mentioned before, I think that Aaron Rodgers is a decent contrarian play at quarterback. So Adams, I think, is a good guy to pay up for. Do you feel any differently, or are you concerned about the ankle injury he's dealing with?
I mean, definitely a little concerned. It's a little bit heightened risk of a bust, but again, you're getting, and the thing is with Davante Adams, okay, his ownership's still at 21%. We got him projected for, but Aaron Rodgers' ownership is really low, right? So like you're going to bring your sort of total ownership. And again, that's kind of how you should be looking for things in GPPs, your total ownership of how your plays are adding up when you're just projecting like how chalky your lineup's going to be. And I think that with Aaron Rodgers being lower owned, I think that's a really good thing for Davante Adams. So I'm in on that. That being said, it's a bit of a heightened risk bust spot, like we said. I think for wide receiver, like he's not a must play like Dalvin Cook is for me, but at the same time, like I want exposure to him on the slate. I mean, absolutely. If you're making like multiple lineups, if you're making more than like 3 lineups, like I want exposure to him. I want to be probably at the field. Like it's one of those situations. And again, taking advantage of, because every time I'm playing Davante Adams, maybe not every time, but I'm going to try and get, more Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams stacks than the field will have. Just a little bit. And I think that's easy to achieve because Aaron Rodgers won't be highly owned. So I think the interesting receivers on this slate are, we talked about Myers, but then Allen and Jefferson, because Keenan Allen and Justin Jefferson both have running backs who are in really good spots too. And they're both projected for ownership. And Justin Jefferson's ownership projection has come up. He's the 4th chalkiest on the slate. I love him. I love the spot. But are Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson going to have massive games? They could because it's the Cowboys, but it's it's a little bit. One of them could easily bust. So and it's probably not going to be Cook.
Would you be willing to make an onslaught stack where you go with Cousins, Cook, and Jefferson and/or Thielen?
I think that's probably a decent idea for sure. And again, we're talking like, maybe if you like them both, you could definitely do that even in like a 3-max. Like if you're making just like a 3-max lineup or something like that, using one of them on that approach isn't a bad idea. But that's definitely some kind of mix I would consider, because the thing about Jefferson is he doesn't necessarily need 12 targets to go off, right? So he's a guy who's got such good yards after the catch, been playing so well against single coverage, and his yards per reception, I think he's up to like 4th in the league or something. He's just making big plays. So he could get like 6 targets and like 2 of them could go for 40 yards and one of them a touchdown. And all of a sudden it's 6K because he's not expensive. That's the other thing about Justin Jefferson. I think that's why he's really coming up. He's now more chalky than Terry McLaurin. I think that's definitely a scenario. So I do like him. It's just, realistically, we're talking about 2 Vikings players projected at high ownership. So it always gives you a little pause.
Yeah, so I like Justin Jefferson. I think I do like the idea of the onslaught stacks for the Vikings. The one thing I'll say about Jefferson, I wouldn't play him in cash games. If you look at his production over the last few weeks, so he had the game against the Falcons where he just absolutely destroyed, went for 166 yards, a pair of touchdowns, scored 43 fantasy points. Then he follows it up with 5 fantasy points against the Packers, 9 against the Lions, then another big game against the Bears. He's all over the place. He's been in some good matchups that he's not done well in. And then he's been in some harder matchups where he's done really well. And so I find him somebody who, which I think it makes sense also. I mean, a rookie wide receiver picked in the first round, there's a lot of variance to that position. Even though Justin Jefferson's probably already one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, there's still a good amount of variance there. So I'm not quite ready to put him in cash game lineups, but GPPs, I definitely think that makes sense. Jacoby Myers, we talked about a lot of these wide receivers now because there's only so many of them to stack with quarterbacks. There's like 6 viable passing quarterbacks on the slate, and all the rest of them are going to be running the ball. One other guy that I do want to talk about, and this ties into those running quarterbacks. What are you doing with the Saints wide receiver? So Michael Thomas, I was all ready to fire up Michael Thomas when I thought Jameis Winston was going to be the quarterback, because if you looked at the second half of that game, even though Michael Thomas didn't do a ton, Jameis Winston was looking at him a lot. He got a couple of targets in the red zone. I think Winston threw 10 passes. 5 of them went to Michael Thomas. Now we've got Taysom Hill as the quarterback. We don't really know what to expect from him as a pass thrower. Is Michael Thomas viable with Taysom Hill as quarterback or no?
Okay. So here, I got 2 things to say. First of all, guys, hit that like button. Let's get over 100 before we do anything else. Smash it if you could. Really appreciate it. Helps the show out. But here's the question, wide receivers. Would you rather play Julio Jones or Michael Thomas with Taysom Hill this week? Because I think I'd rather play Julio Jones.
Oh, without a doubt. And Julio Jones also has less ownership.
Yeah. I love Julio as a play this week. Absolutely love him. 10% ownership. I get it. Lattimore, but that's just scaring people off. Julio Jones has burned the Saints before. He's burned pretty much every cornerback at some point in his career, right? So I love the spot for Julio coming off a bye too. But the question remains, do you want Michael Thomas in there as well? I don't have an answer for you folks. I don't. I think right now the answer is no. I think you play Taysom Hill on his own. I think that Greg alluded to this. Like they obviously have some kind of plan. Like it's some kind of wildcat. Look, Taysom Hill's strength is his legs. If we're projecting him for like 200 yards as like a good passing game, can't be good for Michael Thomas, even if he gets like 12 targets. So I think at 7,300, we'll see. Maybe his ownership will dip to like, again, and this is another reason why it's just so valuable to have access to these ownership projections. Maybe his ownership dips to like 3% or something like that before lock, his ownership projections. At that point, I'd be interested. But like, if he's going to stay in the top 10 projected owns, I'm probably going to say no. And I do definitely like coming back with Julio Jones more on the other side with Taysom Hill. I think it gives you access to the 2 best pieces in that game. And you don't have to pay up for 2 wide receivers now. So that's how I like attacking this game.
So one more wide receiver situation that I think we need to talk about here. Nobody on the Steelers really seems to pick up all that much ownership at wide receiver. I think we've just gotten to a point where people are like, I don't know who to roster between Deontay
Yeah.
Johnson and Chase Claypool. And I think that most people, nobody really rosters Juju at this point. He's kind of priced in the same range as those guys, and
Yeah.
he's
And
just
he
not
shouldn't.
nearly as productive.
Yeah.
I think that both Claypool and Deontay Johnson are viable this week. I lean a little bit towards Johnson. If you look at his targets over the last few games, 15, he had the game against the Ravens where only had 3, but then the last 2 weeks, 10 against Dallas, 11 against Cincinnati. Claypool does tend to get a little bit more looks in the red zone, but still, I look at the overall volume that Deontay Johnson's getting, and I think that he makes for a really solid wide receiver play. He's the guy I want to roster the most. I also don't mind making double stacks of Roethlisberger with Deontay Johnson and Claypool, but Johnson is the priority for me in the Steelers passing game. How about for you?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm leaning. But again, it is kind of a situation where, Deontay Johnson at 12.4% projected again. Claypool about 5% less. It's easier to go overweight on Claypool, but I wouldn't mind being overweight on both these guys if you're making like a bunch of lineups. I really think that there's a potential that one of these guys breaks the slate. It's very similar to the situation we saw last week. And quite frankly, people are probably lucky that one of those guys didn't go for 40 points and like all the touchdowns didn't go to Claypool again or something, or they didn't all go to Deontay Johnson. Could have easily happened. So it could have a situation again. I think it's going to be a similar type game for Pitt. But I agree, like Deontay Johnson getting more consistent target. He's more efficient too with his targets. Like Claypool, he's still raw, right? Like he's kind of, you see it, he looks great. And then it's like, well, what was he doing on that passing route or something, right? So a little bit more efficiency with Deontay Johnson. I think he's become more the go-to guy for Ben if it does kind of get down to crunch time. So you're just guaranteed more targets. So I'm viewing the same. It's a lot of potential, but definitely still prefer a little bit Deontay Johnson. I'm going to throw out a name for you here.
Okay.
I'm probably going to play this guy because, again, everyone's rostering Dalvin Cook. So we like that game. So who do you come back with on the other side? Amari Cooper's 5,400. Now, with the 2 games that Dalton has started, he's got 7 passes in both those games. Now he's at a home game in a dome against a Viking secondary that, they're not good. Like, they don't have good corners. This is a very winnable matchup for Amari Cooper. I know it's the Cowboys. I know it's Dalton. And look, we could have a similar situation to last week where the Vikings just blitz every play and Dalton is like out by halftime again. But I think there's a lot of potential here for Amari Cooper, mainly because of the price of 5,400.
So I'll say this also. The game where he got hurt, notwithstanding, the game against the Cardinals where the Cowboys also looked terrible. Dalton threw the ball 54 times.
54 times, I know.
54 times. So, I mean, you look at that, and I agree. You first said Amari Cooper, and I was kind of like, I don't know. But then I just pulled up Dalton really quick. I was like, hey, he threw the ball 54 times. The Cowboys are probably going to be trailing. They're going to be a situation where they're going to throw
everyone
the ball
likes Dalvin Cook so much. Someone's going to come back and have like 12, 14 targets or something right on the other side. You figure so.
No, I could get behind that. I guess the other question would be, CeeDee Lamb at 5,000. Maybe he's viable also, although to that point, not quite as much action as Cooper got in other games that Dalton started. But yeah, I think that Lamb and Cooper, if you wanted to go really off the board with a guy who's a crazy but maybe not so crazy GPP play, yeah, some of those Cowboys receivers, I could get behind that. It wasn't something I'd considered until you just said it, but yeah, that kind of clicks. That makes sense to me.
21% market share for Amari Cooper on all the Andy Dalton pass attempts this year so far. So that's pretty good. That's right up there with almost not quite elite like the top guys, but that's right up there. That's up there with guys like Deontay Johnson, guys like that. So he's getting a good market share with Dalton.
No, I could dig it. And the other thing too is, as bad as Dalton looked in his first game, I don't really think he's that bad. Like, I don't think he's good by any means, but I don't think he's as bad as some of these other, bottom feeding quarterbacks we have in the league that we've seen pop in. So yeah, I think that Dalton and the Cowboys are probably a little more viable than people would think, given how terrible they've been lately. The other thing also is just think about all these terrible quarterbacks the Cowboys have had rotating in and out recently.
Yeah.
Dalton's okay. He's not that bad. And if he's going to throw the ball 54 times, I do think that's kind of a sneaky spot to target there.
And let's not forget Minnesota's secondary is bad. I mean, they were 1 inch away from like a Nick Foles underthrowing that ball 1 inch. They lose that game to the Bears. So if they can just give Dalton protection, I really do think that you can see one of those Cowboys receivers at the game. So
Yeah, no, I dig it. I'm actually happy you pointed that out because I'm gonna get some exposure there now. One other thing to mention here, guys, we have a special running right now for new members at Awesemo.com. Head over and you get an NFL Express Weekly Pass for only $1 when you use the promo code Mayflower at checkout. This pass includes access to all tools and content for showdown and single game slates, including player projections, ownership projections, and the top plays tool. Sign up now and get access to 4 major showdown slates on Thanksgiving Day. And this offer is valid through November 26th. So Mayflower, obviously, that is a Thanksgiving reference, and even good for the people who live up in Canada, like Jeff, who are not going to be celebrating the American Thanksgiving because they had their Thanksgiving, like 6 weeks ago, where you guys celebrate. What is your, whatever it is that your Thanksgiving celebrates? I don't know. I don't know the story of Canadian Thanksgiving.
Oh, God, I looked this up this year. What do we? Oh my God. Is it? I can't remember. It's something. It's something with like the harvest or something. I can't. I actually looked it up. I can't. It's something that wasn't. Not important to me because it didn't stick in my brain. Something they don't harvesting fields and stuff. I think, but.
They don't teach it very much in the Canadian public school system.
It's like, hey, look, America's got it, so we got to have it too.
All right, let's move over and talk about the tight ends. Very easy position to fill on FanDuel because this is a position that once again sucks this week. And so FanDuel, it's easy enough to just throw Taysom Hill in. I mean, even if you get a bad quarterback game from him, I mean, he scores 8 fantasy points, whatever. He's still going to be one of the top tight end values. So DraftKings, though, this is where it gets a little more interesting. Is there anybody you actually like? Because I think this is another slate where I'm just going to kind of spray and pray. It's like, hey, I'm going to have a bunch of guys who I have like 8 to 12% exposure to, and just fingers crossed that I'm overweight to one of them who ends up catching 2 passes for 8 yards and 2 touchdowns. Spray
and pray. That is something I'll be using, a line I'll be using a lot from now on. I love that. Another Washington player in play, Logan Thomas, 3,300. Again, like, one of these guys are going to bust, right? I mean, out of like McKissic, Thomas, McLaren. So, but Thomas is the cheapest, right? 3,300. So I do kind of like that play a little bit. I have to admit, I don't love, like, I'd much rather play McLaren because I think he's got the massive upside. But Thomas at 3,300 is really interesting, mainly because this tight end slate is so bad. I'm actually really interested in Hayden Hurst too. I know I mentioned Julio Jones, but the Saints are like a bottom 8 team against defending against the tight ends. Hurst has 7.33 targets over his last 3 games. Ridley's banged up. I think he's questionable. I don't think there's been a huge a decision on him yet.
I think they said he's playing this morning.
He's playing. Okay, so maybe that hurts him a little bit, but again, he's not 100%. And like realistically, Hurst has still been getting targets with Ridley in the lineup, so not like a huge concern there. But I still think Hayden Hurst on this slate. Again, we're talking about one of the games with the highest projected point totals. Like, I still like that game to shoot out, even with Taysom Hill at quarterback. So I think Hayden Hurst is interesting. Dallas Goedert, bad weather again in Cleveland, and then Goddard is just, even with Ertz out, he's not doing anything. So
he gets hurt every time he steps on the field. Anybody hits Dallas Goedert. Like last week, it was like, oh, I wonder if this will be the Goddard week now that he's out there. Literally the first catch he gets hit. He comes off the field with an injury. Ended up coming back in, and he was okay for the game. I mean, relative to the other tight ends we usually have to choose from. I mean, 6 targets against the Giants, caught 4 of them for 33 yards. But yeah, I mean, it's very scary to have a guy who's like the Anthony Davis of type mold of the NFL, where it's like every single time the guy's on the field, he's walking off and he's going into the blue 10. So that is a concern. There are very few players where I knock them because of their chance to get injured in game. Literally whoever you put at tight end for the Eagles gets hurt every single game.
Yeah, like Richard Rodgers is the play, right? He's like the only guy who seems to be like prone to that, or not prone to that curse. So look, I think Goddard is okay, but you do have weather concerns. He's also getting up there in ownership now. He's the second projected highest owned play. So I don't really like that. I'm kind of interested in Jordan Akins at the bare min. He's back from injury. He's the better pass catching tight end. He has seen a few more red zone targets than Darren Fells over the last couple of weeks. I don't love it because Fells is there. Obviously, he's still got 2 wide receivers who are heavily involved now. But I think at the min price, that's who I would be looking to. But realistically, Hurst, Thomas, probably my 2 guys who I'll spray and pray with the most. Maybe sprinkle a little bit of Goddard in there, but I don't know, man. Like, I might just take my min price approach and just be like, you know what, he's 2,500. I might just use Jordan Akins. Those are the four guys I'm mainly interested in. I don't know if you have anyone else to bring up because I really don't.
I think Mark Andrews is okay just because 4,900 is much cheaper than we typically see
Right.
from him. 9 targets last week. That's a season high. So that's pretty encouraging that he's coming off a 9-target game.
Too. Like that's a really easy stack with Lamar. Yeah.
So I think that he's okay. If Noah Fant plays, just because he's questionable, I think that's going to suppress his ownership. It's an okay matchup against the Dolphins. They have a good defense, except haven't been particularly good against tight ends. And if we look at Fant, I mean, especially because Albert O's been hurt, I mean, look at the target share for Fant the last few games, 7-9, game with 3, which isn't great, but then a game 7 last week. So if he plays, I think that he's a guy we could at least count on for volume. And that's one of the other things that's also really hard about the tight end position this week is I look at some of these cheaper, which basically everybody's cheap. There's nobody who's remotely expensive on the slate. I think who's overall the most expensive. It's Mark Andrews at 4,900. There's not a single tight end on the slate that's over 5,000 on DraftKings. And it's just tough to even figure out who's going to get targets. There's a lot of these guys that are going to end up getting 2-3 targets. Some might not get targeted at all. So it's nice to see the Fant's at least getting relatively regular targets. It's a tough position. Here's the good thing though. I wouldn't sweat it too much because almost all of these guys are going to be bad. So you could sit there and really rack your brain and be like, I don't know which room I want to roster. And at the end of the day, it's probably not going to matter because almost none of them are going to score fantasy points.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like I'm just Jordan Akins is the cheapest that I like, so I'll just go there. I think Andrews and Lamar Jackson stack is actually pretty interesting in this spot. But yeah, I think he legitimately does probably have the best upside. I think Hurst has fairly good upside too. But the other guys, I don't know, man. Like I just don't really see where the big game's coming from at this point. Like I think you're right with that maybe other than like an Andrews or a Hurst breakout game, you're really not fading much here. Like not much is going to happen. So maybe just go with the cheap guys and like Thomas and Akins.
Yeah, and there isn't even chalk at the position. So
exactly.
it's not like there's a guy who's going to kill you because
spin the tight end wheel of fortune.
Yep. That's what I was saying. It's a spray and pray week. I'm just gonna have a bunch of guys that mix in, and just be like, who knows? I don't think this is the position that's gonna make or break your slate.
Yeah.
I have a defense take this week, by the way.
All right.
Very, very rare that I look at the defenses and really have a take I like. But on FanDuel, so we've said the ownership on Taysom Hill is going to be ridiculously high. Right. You know what that means? Nobody's going to roster the Falcons defense, who is nearly min priced on FanDuel. And we don't know what we're getting from Taysom Hill. What if they actually ask him to throw the ball and he just can't really do it well? What if he's really inaccurate and turns the ball over a couple of times? The fact that you could get the Falcons for nearly min price at no ownership, to me, that's one of the stronger defense leverage plays we've ever seen. And I even think you could go with Taysom Hill at tight end or whatever you want to call it for FanDuel. You put him in at tight end and you could still roster the Falcons defense because there's a very realistic scenario where he scores like 5 fantasy points, sucks, is still okay at tight end, and the Falcons defense scores a bunch of fantasy points. So I think the Falcons defense on FanDuel is one of my favorite defense plays that I've had all season.
I think it's a really good play too. This week is so weird now because I want to play and on DK they're 2,300, right? So they're getting up there a little bit of ownership, but like you said, there probably are a better play on FanDuel, right? Because you're getting so much leverage because everyone's going to have Taysom Hill in the lineup, right? So, and on FanDuel, so you again, you're just playing Taysom Hill with the Falcons defense, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes perfect sense. And then on DraftKings, I mean, 2,300, like they're super cheap. My problem is like I said, I like Julio Jones in this game too, and I kind of like Taysom Hill. So, like, do I play them with those two guys? I don't know. Like that just seems too.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
That seems like a little bit of a bridge too far, right? So maybe it works out, but I guess maybe in that scenario, maybe you could think about playing Taysom Hill and the Falcons defense and leaving Julio out or something, and maybe playing Michael Thomas instead. That actually might be a stack that could work out because you're just getting a bunch of garbage time, or like, you're saying the Falcons are getting pick 6 and there's not much field time for Julio, but no, I still like the play. And especially if you're making non-Falcons Saints lineups, absolutely love the Falcons as a defense. I do like them to cover this week too. I liked them before the news came out that he was starting. Yeah, I see the point there. And for cheap defenses, that's definitely where I look. No one else really like popping off. I think, you have to watch the quarterback news with Detroit and Carolina. I think the Lions could be semi-interesting. Don't love them as a defense, but again, we're talking about backup QBs. Anything could happen there. So I think, under 2,800, the Panthers and the Lions both kind of interesting this week.
Yeah, I think the Dolphins definitely viable. Also, Drew Lock has largely been terrible this season. The Dolphins have a pretty good defense. I don't really think it's that underrated as it was earlier in the year. I think people are pretty hip to the fact that the Dolphins have a good defense at this point. But still, they're cheap, and it's not like they're uber shock or anything like that. Not that anybody has a defense.
I actually thought they'd be chalkier. Like, I'm actually surprised at these projections. We only have them as the fifth most popular defense right now, which, to me is surprising. Like, I like getting up to the Dolphins a lot too.
Yeah, so I think that's a good one. And then like I said, this is really the one. And here's the other thing with defense too. There's never a spot where I'm looking at defense just be like, this is the lock of all locks for defenses. But I just like some of the leverage there, particularly on FanDuel with the Falcons defense. Nobody's going to want to roster him. Everybody's rostering Taysom Hill, and it's plenty viable, I think, to play both of them in the same lineup. So let's close it out today, Jeff. What is your favorite stack of the week?
Yeah, so I'll stick with my Taysom call. I think it's going to work out okay just for points, and I think stacking him, like I said, I like stacking with Julio on the other side. I think and maybe even using two Atlanta players like Hayden Hurst. I will say this: I was really big on Matt Ryan. We didn't really talk about him before the Taysom Hill news. Like, I would have preferred to play Matt Ryan over Jameis, but with Taysom being so cheap, I think that it's just hard for me to get off if I'm stacking that game to use him. So that's probably where, I'll be looking for kind of main stacks like Taysom, and then using one or two of those Atlanta players on the other side.
It's going to be Aaron Rodgers to Davante Adams, because Adams is pretty popular this week. So maybe that's not really a crazy play to most people. Certainly not, but nobody's rostering Aaron Rodgers. It's the game with the highest total on the slate. And if you think that Davante Adams is going to have a big game, stands to reason Aaron Rodgers is probably going to play pretty decent also. There are a bunch of running back plays that I like this week that are pretty cheap that we mentioned, kind of that, low 5K range. So there's a bunch of guys we get there that's going to give us enough extra salary to be able to pay up at quarterback and wide receiver. So I think that the Rodgers play is going a little bit overlooked. So give me them as a combination. That's going to wrap up the show for this week. Guys, before you go, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the Awesemo Podcast Network. And with that in mind, I hope you guys all have a great day. Oh, also, one more thing. Later on the day, we have On the Contrary coming up and the MMA Live Before Lock show for UFC 255. So, Jordan, play the music. Have a good weekend.